just been doing it for so many years, I am now totally blown away by every result and any test trial I've done with compost tea, which is why I guess I talked people into doing this. Did I talk you guys into kind of?
No. Well, we were going to go extractor.
Right.
And you talked us into going.
Compost tea.
Yeah.
So when we talk about extraction, and actually this is Dr. Elaine Ingham, who I studied under, a Soil Food Web. I took the course that she does. She does incredible teaching around life in soil. And if you take her course, you have to take soil biology, compostings, compost tea brewing, and then finally you can look in a microscope. And so that was 10 years ago, and I actually visited and stayed at her farm in California, and learned so much from her. So she's a real mentor for me. She's showing us how to do extract there, which is when you take that compost or anything that has that high microbial life, and you put it in water and maybe massage it, loosen it. You don't add any amendments, but then the microbes get released in the water, and that is extracting, if you will, the life in soil or compost into water. So that's why it's called an extraction. With compost tea, it's a little different. You're actively aerating, so adding oxygen, because we want to promote and keep alive the beneficial microbes that are aerobic. And if we don't have water, it's going to be anaerobic, and you're going to be selecting for the anaerobic microbes, which will take over the joint. And I have a video of that, what that looks like. But basically, you're aerating it, and usually optimum is 24 hours. You add amendments. You can add compost tea, as I said, or worm castings. You can add soil, and then you add the oxygen, and then you give it food. And I've tweaked recipes, and we share recipes with different people that are making teas, and I've come up with one where it is, and I'll show you when we're in the trailer, liquid kelp, so it feeds the bacteria and fungal, and then fish hydrolysate, which is a cold process for taking the nutrients out of fish, and it's also, they keep the oil in there. So if you are buying any fish, stay away from emulsion where it's heating, so you lose a lot of nutrients, and they take the oil out. So the hydrolysate is what you want. So that feeds the fungi, and then a little bit of humic acid, which helps to bind it. Mind you, in worm castings, you know how it has that dark cocoa color? That's actually humic acid. So if you want to get some humic acid, take some castings, just slowly pour water over. What drips down is pure humic acid. But those are the ingredients I add, the amendments. And then you bubble it for 24 hours, and then you end up with this compost tea. All right, so some of the benefits, well, it holds water. And so these are things that we've learned from different studies that have been done. The plants take up the nutrients that helps them resist infection, and I've found a lot of different things with the compost tea, and I actually have a test trial to show its effect on things like powdery mildew, which is really exciting. It changes, it increases the rooting depth of your plants, and then it also speeds up the decomposition, because you have so many more players in the room, if you will, so many more microbes. And then finally, you don't need the chemically based herbicides and pesticides and things like that, because these microorganisms are, first of all, they're not going to be killed by adding, what does Zach Brown say? One application of chemical fertilizer kills half the life in your soil. And what we want to encourage is soil life. Does everyone know about that symbiotic relationship between the plant and the microbes in soil? So the plant takes in sun, converts it into exudates. 50, sometimes 70% of what that plant takes in, it puts through the roots to feed the microbes. And in exchange, those microbes get whatever nutrients that plant has the potential to take up and feeds that back into the plant. So that is that symbiotic relationship that we want to encourage. So imagine if you're increasing the microbial population with a tea, and now you've got amendments. So these microbes have been in the solution, they're eating the amendments. Those amendments are now plant available. And you're applying it on your plant as a foliar spray, a root drench, and for example, the bacteria is sticky, because it forms the aggregates. If you spray it as a foliar spray, say you've got a little powdery mildew, you spray it, the bacteria will stick to the leaves, it will eat the powdery mildew, and the new growth will be clean. And I have some slides that demonstrate that when I did a test trial last year. And so it also has plant available nutrients right at those leaves. So I can still remember the first time that a farm we built in Bridgeport, and we were watering the beds, and I was watering these peppers, and I got to the end of the bed, and I looked back, and literally these you could see the difference, which is so exciting to me. And I hope if you do this trial that you'll be able to experience that, because it's taken up immediately, and it's plant available nutrient. All right, how to make it? This is the farm in Bridgeport. We were given 1.6 acres of an abandoned strip mall. It's empty for 25 years. We turned it into an organic farm. It's still going great. It's Reservoir Community Farm. This was 12 years ago. So that's a year later, and now we have all these beds, and we had no money left for fertilizer, so what do? I said, well, I have a worm composter in my dining room. Maybe we could make tea with it, because I was learning about that. So we did. And we took our garbage can, we aerated it like crazy. We took an old, I think, cheesecloth at that time, and then we just put the worm castings in there, and that's when we started making compost tea. And incredible results. So basically, as I talked about, you're adding the amendments that are going to be food for bacteria and fungi. You want to use non-chlorinated water, because guess what? Chlorine's going to kill the bacteria. And this is what I use. You brew it for 24 hours. You look at it under the microscope. I remember, 6 years ago, we wanted to move to a certified organic farm, and we had to come up with regulations, because there weren't any, for worm composting, for growing organically, and for compost tea brewing. So if you want them, we have them on the website, and we can now stay and work comfortably at a certified organic farm because the products we're creating are certified organic. One of the rules we put into worm compost tea brewing was vegetative inputs only, so that you can spray up to the day of harvest and not worry about pathogens. The other thing we wrote in there was you have to test it under the microscope after every 4 brews, which is actually a really good exercise. With this trailer, it comes with a microscope and a table, and so every time you've got tea, and we're going to do this today, this is tea I brewed yesterday that I brought, we're going to look at it under the microscope and make sure that it's good to go. And for a lot of reasons, including you don't want it to go anaerobic. And what does that look like? Well, I'm going to get into that. I'm going on and on about other things, but you can apply this to seeds, to foliage, the roots of plants, and any time during the growing season. So one thing we're going to be doing with the trailer is starting at 5 different farms in June and going right through till October, and coming to each farm once every 3 weeks. So again, this is what we're talking about for organic certification.
Will that go through drip tape?
I don't.
Tough, yeah.
It's tough, just because
Yeah.
you don't know where it's going to clog.
Right.
So when we are talking about using a sprayer, we're going to have a 55-gallon sprayer that goes with it. You want to have a diaphragm pump, and you want to be able so that an agitator, so it stays moving, because there's sediments, right, in there. So here's mentioned chlorinated water. These are all the rules for certified organic. We talked about the inputs. We used to use molasses. In fact, that's what I learned from Dr. Ingham. And then we turned it around, because what we found looking under the microscope is just bacterial food. And bacteria loves it. So they'll multiply so much, you have a chance that it's going to lose oxygen. So we're moving away from molasses, and that's using kelp and that also feeds the fungal. Yes?
Do the microbes create heat as they're growing?
No.
Okay.
No, they don't. So it's a different process than in the permaphilic. All right, so there are other things you can add. I tend not to waver from this formula that I've got because I found it works so well. And I try to stay away from things like bone meal and that sort of thing because you just don't know how the animals have been treated, antibiotics, whatever. We're trying to keep it as pure and natural as possible. But that exists, and we should have this available, right? These slides, so you can go back through. Yeah, I usually give it as a PDF. This you probably won't be able to hear, but, oh, I thought I had the video. Hold on, oh yes. I don't know if we want to look at a video right now, because you probably can't hear it.
Alright, so let's mix our solution. The first thing it calls for is a cup of liquid. And a good way to remember the ratio between kelp and fish is 1 to 4. So if that was a cup of kelp, this will be a 1/4 cup of the fish. So when I use the humic acid, it's really as a little bit of an extra shot. The worm castings themselves have a lot of humic acid in them.
Can you hear that?
By how dark it is.
No, so I can just talk over it. Well, this is
And this will be
making the solution, and we've been brewing at Gilberti's herb farm gardens in Westport, and here's Joe showing it. And I wanted to show this just to say, this is the brewer. That's a 55-gallon brewer. They brew it every week, and they sell it $10 a gallon, and they usually sell out. So it's been 7 years. I know, right? Do the math on that one.
Yeah.
They've been doing it for about 7 years. And I go there religiously every 4 weeks to test it under the microscope and make sure it's good. So I was actually telling Daniel on the drive up, he calls it compost worm tea, but so one time last year I showed up unannounced and said, oh, time to do the test. I looked at it and there was no life. I went, well, what's going on? He goes, that makes no sense. I had the intern wash it with hydrogen peroxide. I said, did he rinse it thoroughly? And he asked, no, was I supposed to rinse it out? So, just so you know.
I'm a big fan of compost tea because it's a really good way to be in harmony with nature. Because once you're
Okay, anyway,
nature instead
it does go on. I kind of wanted to show you Green Acres, but for another time. All right, so anyway.
So they have one that they're using a little bit for themselves, or they have two where one's for sale and one's for them?
Nothing ever gets wasted. Because they have an organic nursery, anything that they don't use, they use on all their plants. And they just swear by it.
I guess I'm wondering if they run out and they don't actually have enough for what they need.
They wait till they find out if there's any left. And sometimes they'll brew twice a week.
Okay.
And where I'm working now, or where our worm composting business is, they're brewing compost tea as well. The Hickory's Farm, 100-acre certified organic farm in Ridgefield, they're brewing every week as well. So if you just want to do that, it's really a great way to income stream, and also teaching people how to grow organically, which is why I'm doing this. So one way to get those indigenous microorganisms is to add a pound of your own soil. And now you're feeding them, and they're multiplying. And so that's one thing. If you're doing, as I was talking about woodies, and we did this one thing at Green Acres, which you didn't get to see, but it's up in the Berkshires, where we took soil from a very mature cherry tree, and they were planting a lot of cherry saplings, and we inoculated all the saplings with the tea we made from that. Did I mention high fungal? So here's an example. I'll just talk over this, but this is the first time you're seeing microscopy, and I can't find my arrow. Hold on. Really, I got this.
It's right, yeah.
Where is it?
It's right on the bar, like a third of the way in.
Oh, I see. Okay, I got this. Maybe, I see.
40 times magnification.
I'm a bit of a geek when it comes to compost. I'm like blown away by all this, all this fungal. This is Ken Twombly. He was walking in the state forest. He found some disease-resistant mountain laurels. Anyway, so he brought this soil, and I said, let's make a compost tea with it, because I have some really sick mountain laurels that have never bloomed. That was 3 years ago. So I took some pictures of the amazing blooms this year on my mountain laurels. That's 3 years later. So what happened? So we just used that soil. We didn't add any other worm castings or anything. So you can see how much diverse fungal is now in our compost tea. So I literally sprayed once, totally drenched the 2 really sickly mountain laurels. And I think I added, oh, maybe I didn't. This is an older version of the photos. You're going to have to believe me. The photos of the mountain laurels from this year. And last year they bloomed, but this year they're really taking off.
And just the 5 ones.
Yeah, 1 application. This is why I'm just, I'm so excited to have this opportunity to really have others learn about and for us to test it. So we really want to work with UConn and do it scientifically correct. In fact, just the other day, we were at a field day and someone said, I love compost tea, but there's no proof that it works. And so this will hopefully really show people things that I've learned. And I'll show you quickly the test trial I did 2 years ago, maybe, 2019 at the Hickory's farm, and what I did last year when I was working at this, I spent a year living in a dorm room last year at Bard College at Simon's Rock in the Berkshires, starting a regenerative farm and introducing composting dining hall food, and also, most important, compost tea brewing and microscopy. And working with students on that, they were like, lights went on and they're running with it now. So biofilm is something, and the reason we're not going to be brewing compost tea here today is whenever you're finished, and you see I have compost tea in there, it's going to leave this film, this biofilm. If you don't wash that off with, a jet hose or whatever, when it's wet, it's going to dry on there, and then it can be harbingers for these anaerobic microbes. And so the next time you make a tea, can't be pretty. So you really want to make sure everything's clean right after you empty it. So I'm going to take this home, and if we were coming to your farm, that would be the protocol whenever we finish the tea brewing, is to wash it out thoroughly, because you can get this biofilm on it. So you just want to make sure when you're using hydrogen peroxide. I'm not using that anymore, I guess, because even before that light bulbs went off at Gilberti's, if you rinse it out thoroughly, that's fine. But I find with a strong hose, everything comes right off when it's wet. So I'm moving away now from using that. And also keep in mind, if you're getting a brewer, imagine cleaning that one on the right. You just don't want to even start there. So simple is better in terms of how many hoses. Yes?
So with the rinse, it's not too harmful if you have a little bit of the last batch getting into the next one, but it is harmful if you have that hydrogen peroxide getting
Both
into
are bad.
the next.
What happens with the hydrogen peroxide, if you don't rinse it, it's like adding chlorinated water.
Yes.
So it's going to kill the bacteria. If you leave some of that film, that will also, you don't want to introduce the anaerobic microbes, who I'm going to introduce you to next, because we don't want that. Sorry, you had a question.
Would vinegar be safer than hydrogen
Probably.
peroxide, or would it still be just as harsh, you think?
Probably better than the hydrogen peroxide, but what I'm finding the last year and a half, I guess, I am just using, and I check it as soon as I'll make a brew, and then when I fill it with water the next time, I look at it to make sure there's nobody living in there.
Okay.
And water's nice and clean. So there are ways, although when I started it this year, a mouse had fallen in and gotten...
Oh.
Anyways, so when I turned on the brewer, it was not a pretty sight. So just keep in mind things like that. Details. Okay, so again,
That's organic.
you get the pump that matches, and you want to have this is my engineer son, 1.35 watts per gallon of air being pumped through. He's calculated that out, of course. You brew it for 24 hours, and you test it periodically under the microscope. And here are our assistants helping with that, which I have to laugh about. Anyway, and then you do that after 24 hours. So that's why we're going to take a quick look at this under the microscope, which I can connect to this projector. Again, did I mention it's all about aeration? Otherwise, guess what will happen? All right, bear with me.
So this is compost tea, 100 times magnification, 20 hours after brew.
So this
Seeing
is-
a lot of nematodes
See the nematodes running around? Those are beneficial predators.
in this one drop.
So I'm not showing you a lot of the microbial backgrounds to know
Lots of
about this, but
aggregates full of bacteria. I'm also seeing flagellates, and I'm watching these nematodes come back to life now that they've stopped bouncing around in the brewer.
so that's a nematode there.
So this is 100 times magnification.
And this is what happens
So
if you
compost
lose
tea
oxygen.
is fast.
So-
Following this insect larvae who's enjoying the anaerobic conditions, as you can see, next to what appears to be
Who's that guy?
a very
That's an
important
insect larvae.
nematode.
So
Compost tea that I left in a jar.
now we're looking at 40 hours.
A lot of ciliates running around. This ciliate is actually feeding off a dead microarthropod. You can see the bacteria flying around that he's drawing out of that body. Kind of gross. Much more ciliates running around. Sparse bacteria because the ciliates have been eating it. Doesn't smell that bad, but it's going there. So definitely going anaerobic. We're looking at 400 times magnification. This is what appears to be a type of cilia, a Vorticella, sucking up what
So there's no bacteria left. They've just consumed everything. So
A day and a half after brew, you can see.
imagine you put this now
And so the
in your garden.
anaerobic
It's going to eat up all the bacteria in your garden and eventually die because there's oxygen. But
Kind of a sad story. but
this is not
does
what
tell
you
the
want
tale
to-
that you cannot save compost tea. Now we're going to zoom out. This is now 200 times magnification.
I don't know. You can't really see
You can
this.
see how barren the compost tea is. So there really isn't anything there left for the plants. So
Okay, so that gives you an idea of what happens over time. Yes.
So when we're seeing those videos of like 50 hours after brew, is that after you've stopped brewing it
No,
and now there's
so
no longer aeration?
24 hours after that. So it's about 26 hours.
But when there was
Of it
no
sitting
longer
there.
any bacteria left, and you're saying it's 50 hours after the brew, so
Right.
that's like an
So
additional
that's like a
26
day
hours
later.
after. Okay.
Yeah.
Now
So
what
you
if
don't want to just have it sitting around.
what if you were to continue aerating it after 24
That's
hours?
fine. And you can do that. What is optimum? We found, and of course I'm always on the microscope, so I'll say, well, what about 24 hours? What about 28 hours? It keeps the oxygen. It's fine. It just seems to be the optimum amount where the microbes are now full of juice and ready to go. I find the number of, especially bacteria, starts to go down
Okay.
the longer you wait. But it's still
Okay.
active and there's aeration. I'm curious because this has been sitting here since, when did I turn it off? 11:30 this morning.
Okay.
So that's quite a while to sit without oxygen. And I'm only stressing this just because these are aerated microbes that are aerobic.
The other thing is that the food source is being depleted.
Yeah.
So that's one of the reasons that you have bacteria being dying and because other microorganisms are eating it. So that diversity and that ratio of microorganisms are being lost. So that sweet point of 24 hours seems to be key, but it also depends on temperature. So the brewing timing is key because the optimal temperature for this to happen in where you can observe a growth pattern and have that diversity. So these are parameters you have to pay attention to when you brew.
What was the optimal temperature? Did we mention?
Well,
There's a range.
It's interesting. 40 to say 80 degrees is optimum, but what they're finding is it's good to have it outside and go through a night where the temperature drops because that, like everything, diversity, right? The different temperature will be more effective and be complementary for certain microbes depending on when that microbe is in an optimum condition. So having that temperature differential is actually beneficial,
That's the air temperature, not the compost tea temperature.
which is affected by the air temperature.
So that's the air temperature, 40 to 80 degrees, or the compost
Oh, I see.
tea temperature.
Good question. Let's go with compost tea temperature.
Okay.
Yeah, because that's where the microbes are hanging out.
Yep.
So, so I think we're getting there. You can dilute it if you want. We found that this ratio and the recipe I'm going to give you seems to be optimal, but you can certainly dilute it as long as you don't use chlorinated water. And there should never be a smell. It should always smell. And actually, when I start it, especially with the fish, there's a fish smell. I'll come back and check it 8 hours later, and there should be no fish smell because the microbes are consuming it. So that's a good sign to know. So this is the recipe that we use. You saw in the earlier one. So 1 cup of kelp and then 1/4 cup of fish hydrolysate seems to be optimum. A little splash of humic acid. About 2 cups of worm composting for the 5-gallon brew, and 10 pounds. I think I go by pounds, not cups, but it seems to be similar. But it's funny that I wrote it differently. So the pounds for the worm compost in the 55-gallon brew. And this is at the Hickories. They have a compost tea sprayer which is made by Compost Works, and it is the same one that we are getting for this trailer. It's got a diaphragm pump. In fact, I think I put a picture of it. This is a close-up of it, and they pull it with a little tractor. We are, depending on the farms that we'll be working with, again, you want oversized pumping so it's easy to clean, diaphragm pumps, as I mentioned, agitation systems. So this is a picture of the one that has been purchased for this trailer, and it has all of these things, and it's going to have a 200-foot hose. And the thought is probably going to be that you're going to cart this on that type of cart into the field, and then with the hose, you're going to have access to spraying the fields or the beds that you're applying it. It may be different at different farms, and we're going to be working out those types of details. So weekly brewing, how to apply it, the foliar spraying, you want to apply it to the leaf surfaces. We're talking too much here, so I'm going to skip through that, but you'll have the notes. You want to spray it as a foliar spray, and if you're doing leaves, also do the underside of leaves. It's very effective. And then you can simply do a root drench. But once I get the backpack sprayer on, I'm just doing everything. And I find that's really easy to move, especially depending on the topography. So we have a backpack sprayer that's included as well. You can put it on vegetables, flowers, trees, and then just a few trials that I've done. Here, there are some papers on compost tea. You saw this in the beginning. So that's one of them. This is the sample test I did last year. We decided in August that we're going to start zucchini. This is at the campus farm. And immediately got the powdery mildew, and so sprayed the compost tea. 10 minutes later, started to clear up. Like, blew my mind. And so this is now 3 days, and it's pretty much eradicated. And it just kept growing, and that was one application. And then you can see how healthy and wonderful. No sign of powdery mildew after that.
Does time of day have any influence of application?
I like to put it on later in the day, after the main heat. And there's some advantages to that. If you do it in the morning, yes, you'll be able to apply it, but it's going to evaporate as soon as the sun hits it. If you wait until waning hours, what I find is you apply it, and then you've got the dew, and it really works well. So again, sometimes you have that control, sometimes you don't. On a especially a windy day, sunny day like this, probably not the best time to apply it. So just keep those things in mind. You might say, I know it's going to rain at 4 o'clock tomorrow, so I'm going to start my tea at noon and spray it, or say noon the day before. So I'm going to spray it at noon. It's going to be cloudy. It has a chance to soak in, and then the rain will just have it all go into her. So this is the test trial I did in 2019. And one thing I wanted to show you, it really does want to show you, I did a quick chemical analysis of the 2 beds that I was going to do. Come on, you don't be shy. Oh, there we go. And the control side was actually had more nutrients available than the one I was going to use, compost tea, which I thought, well, that's good because that's a way to know. Okay. Don't get like that. Don't be like that. She said. Isn't that
Does
funny?
regular irrigation doesn't affect how potent the compost tea is after you apply it to the crops?
By then it's probably already taken in.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're fine.
Okay.
So what I did do, and which I always do, is I'll add 10% worm casting to my seed starting mix, and then also transplanting a little bit every time you transplant. So all those beneficial microbes are right around the roots of the plant. As the plant grows and matures, those microbes are going to multiply and move with the roots. And then the tea. And what I did with this test in the control, I did the same amendments and sprayed them, but I didn't make a tea. And the other one, I used those amendments with the tea. And then I applied every 3 weeks. So did 5 applications. And then I just took the harvest and had it in similar containers and looked at it. And so here we're going to just quickly go through the different ones. The interesting thing I never expected was the control side had so much bruising and disease compared to the compost tea side, which was so much healthier. So a lot of that, I wanted to make sauce. A lot of the ones on the control side I couldn't use. And also the quality and size of the fruit. And that's one thing I would love to do here is be able to check out the harvest of the control side that you would have and the side where the compost. And maybe you could ask the farmer to take photos, but to incorporate that visual I found really effective. So here it is, it's about to freeze. That was when it used to freeze in early October. And I harvested everything. And then I waited quite a while, like 15 days, to get around to making the sauce. I couldn't use any of the control side tomatoes, which I was like blown away. And the side that had the compost tea side, every tomato was fine.
That's 2 weeks, you said?
Yes, 15 days later. So, okay, so that's that. Anyway, so the more I'm doing this, the more I'm like just blown away by the results and hearing of other people's results. That's why I'm doing this, to share this and to, empower all of us to have this tool.
So in terms of like when it rains, how much time do you want that foliar soaking to happen?
A few hours, and then you'll find it disappears. So, but again, any type of compost you use, you really want it to be vegetative input only, because you're doing a foliar spray. You want to be able to spray everything and not have to worry about any type of pathogen. That's probably the most important part of making compost tea that you can use as a foliar spray. Yes?
I'm interested in knowing which part of the benefit is from the additional nutrients versus the addition of microbes.
Right. Keep in mind, it's the microbes that are supplying the nutrients because they've consumed them.
You're saying that there's no nutrients in the
liquid.
suspended in the water?
There might be. I guess it depends on the microbial population. But the telltale sign for me is that smell of fish is gone. Where'd it go? It's been consumed by the microbes. Now, is there a way to measure that?
Well, you have certainly you can have nutrients that are in the water, but a lot of the nutrients is in the body of the microbes.
Yeah.
So you have that nutrient in the microbe, but when you have other organisms eating others and pooping, they're releasing that nutrient. So you're going to have it in both. But the great value I find is that the actual action all that cycle of nutrients being done through microorganisms, that is where the power is of using compost and compost teas. So it's the recycling of nutrients what pays attention to all this.
Okay. Okay. Did you say that in the control you sprayed it with a kelp?
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
put all the nutrients in
exactly the
without
same amount.
microbes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Because I thought that, well, let's put the same amendments,
Yeah.
right? Good, to warn up, say, well, you fed this guy aside and you didn't feed. Well,
Yeah.
okay, everybody gets the same food. See how you see if it
How can we make 10 pounds of worm castings a week? Like, is that something that's on a scale like a normal worm bin can make?
No.
Or is it, yeah.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, but you're only doing it once every 3 weeks.
Okay, yeah.
And if you have a worm bin, you can easily store castings. In fact, they are saying now you can store castings up to 3 years.
Oh.
And as long as you keep the moisture and have oxygen exchange. So now I puncture holes with a quilting needles and lay that on the surface. I've been doing it for 10 years now. And of course I look at it, make sure everybody's alive and kicking, and it allows oxygen exchange but holds in all that moisture. So that, don't let it dry out. In fact, I did a test trial where I took no castings, and then I added castings that were just harvested, and then I used castings that had been sitting around for 8 months. For several months. And started seedling trays. The one that had been sitting around 6 to 8 months did much better than the castings I just harvested. Because you can imagine, there's still worms in there, there's all these microbes continually breaking down whatever organic matter is left in there. It becomes more and more pure and more plant available nutrients. So that was shocking to me, yes.
So let's say I wanted to make compost tea, but I wanted to really minimize external ingredients. So I don't want to import kelp from somewhere or dead fish from somewhere. Is there other things that I could use instead of those two things?
You know what you could try, which I'm quite fascinated with, is taking things like borage and comfrey and using the liquid from that, and especially if you're growing it yourself, and incorporating that as a food source.
So
I'd love to try
making
that.
like a tea out of the comfrey leaves?
I would just, let it turn it, however they do that, extract, don't let it sit.
Leaves or leaves and roots?
Just the leaves of both. I would suggest that. Does anyone have other ideas?
See where a lot of people add biochar into the mixture because biochar will hold that, hold those micronutrients in and then kind of displace them to the cycle.
And so that you have that now in your soil, and it's also a wonderful home, if you will.
It holds all.
Right, for the microbes. So that's another benefit of having biochar in your fields. Is it's a home for microbes. Cool. Any other questions? Do you want to talk about this part?
You can if you want.
I'm on a roll. So
You're on a roll.
Okay, I'm just going to keep going. So we talked about what would this look like, this compost tea trail, and we're still working out the details, but this sort of is a summary quickly of what we're going to be doing. So there's going to be 5 farms participating season long for 2025, and using the compost tea to amend either vegetables, flowers, fruit, depending. This is a 1-year pilot, and you're not compensated, but you are going to be involved in what we think is going to be a really exciting trial. And we just show up once every 3 weeks to drive you crazy. No, to drive you crazy. No, to work with you. Hopefully you'll have a plan of, okay, I'm going to grow tomatoes, eggplant, and carrots in this bed and this bed. So let's spray this bed and not that and compare. That's the easiest way to do it. What you might want to do instead, thinking out loud here, is say you had 100-foot beds and we have a 200-foot hose that we're bringing, and we park that trailer in the center. We can say this half of the bed of these 2 beds we're going to spray, and this half we're not. So that's the trial, and which is easily applied. So ease of application is sort of key here. And then, as I mentioned, you'll be visited once every 3 weeks. So the trailer shows up. We figure out what you want to put in there. Do you want to have indigenous soil? And do we want to mix it up? All these things we'll figure out. We'll show up. We'll start the compost tea brew. Come back 24 hours later and apply it for you. So you've got to get free labor too. And we'll be doing test trials. Do you want to talk a little bit about those trials that we're going to be doing?
So these are the things that we have to work on. The details is that the thing with compost teas and compost is that there's so many variables in terms that makes a compost or compost tea of quality. And then you have the soil conditions. You might have soils that might be that need some amendment because you have some history of the use of the soil. Might have some compaction. You might have some issues that you need to bring up to control for the lack or the excess of certain nutrients in the soil. And so to be able to talk about the impact of compost teas, at least we have to have a baseline. So a soil analysis, chemical analysis of soil and other soil properties like soil structure, probably water infiltration, aggregation, etc. We have to pick up on that as a baseline to be able to compare it towards the end and see if it had an impact. And that's why we have to convene in terms of the protocols. So we want to be able to say that our application of compost tea made the change that we want to observe. And sometimes it's not only looking at microbes, it's also the uptake of nutrients in the plant. So potentially a sap analysis of your plant you might want to see. Or you want to see just, your fruiting bodies, the quality of your tomatoes, how big they are, how heavy, or how they smell, or how they taste. I mean, there's so many things you can look at and hopefully relate that to your application of compost teas. And one of the challenges that hasn't attracted a lot of agriculture extensionist programs is because there are so many variables you need to control for. It's easier when you have an amendment fertilizer where you like the NPK and you know exactly how much you put into it. When it comes to compost tea, there's a little bit of variation in terms of what you're applying to. So we want to be able to observe that. We want to be able to make some comparison, not only between a control and an experimental bed, but also across other environments or different farms around the place. So we are all learning on this, and hopefully we'll be able to see at the end, the value that a lot of practitioners around the United States are looking at the value of compost tea for soil health.
There are different brands. I'm now enjoying this fish hydrolysate. It's actually a really good one. And the other is the humic acid. So with a measuring cup, you would put those in there. And then you would take your 400 micron mesh bag, which is brand new, but every time you're finished, of course, you're going to clean it. Here's one that I use today to put, when I was adding the compost tea into the backpack sprayer, I had this sitting in there. So it cleaned, if there was any other sediment, it cleaned that. 400 micron. So this 400 micron mesh bag, I've got the amendments in there. It's full of water, it's bubbling away. So if there is any chlorine, the humic acid will help to neutralize the chlorine. This bag, I'll take my 10 pounds of castings and show you what they look like. And you saw these under the microscope, right? So I know that they're healthy and good, and it's the right moisture. So that is the worm castings. I can tell if it's the right moisture because it stays together, but then it comes apart really easily. And putting that in this bag, which I don't want to do because it's so nice and clean. And we're not going to be doing this till June, so I don't want to dirty anything. But imagine I'm putting these the 10 pounds of castings into this bag, and then once it's in here, I will suspend it in here, so it's bubbling away. You saw at Gilberry's how they were doing that. I'll just, a stick or whatever, it sits there. And then what I like to do is massage the bag so the microbes get released. Because they're, you know, they want to hang out with their aggregates, but you want to release that. So I'll do a little massaging, and then I leave. Okay, 24 hours later, I come back. I have my hose. It attaches here. I open that up. Oh, yeah, my son rinsed out. He just finished building this. And there's a housing for the motor, and this stays open like that so that the air, when it is, I'm going back, but you can imagine the air is just going in here and coming from the bottom. Very simple and also very easy to clean. So when you're finished, am I jumping all over the place? I'm talking about starting and finishing at the same time.
Where does the pump go? Is that the bag?
This is it here.
Okay.
So he built a little housing for that. What you want to make sure, you never want to flood your pump. So with this design, what he does, it always goes above the tank before it goes into the pump. So there's no way it will ever, even if you turn it off and it's open, it can't get higher than itself. So that's a good defense or safety mechanism, I should say. But it's really straightforward. We can lift this and move it. We're probably going to have it sticking out this door so that you
Pull
can
the trailer right up to the side, basically.
That's right, and then you can fill it up. And here's something interesting too. I brought this. Guess how many micron mesh bag this is?
400.
400. Yes, how'd you guess? So they use this for paint straining, but it happens to be 400 micron. So what we'll do, depending on what we're using our tea for, is you can put this in a 5-gallon bucket, if it were hanging out the side of the door, and then it would strain into this. So that's another way to strain any extra sediment or whatever out of it. So there's all kinds of ways. Hear the plants going, thank you, that's really
And everybody likes cilantro. Take some cilantro on the way home.
Wow, looks
Seriously?
good.
Yeah.
It's literally my favorite.
And then you also want to do the underside, so you can go like this with it. And this is the same if it's coming out of a backpack sprayer or